Has the world changed? Since the last time we met in Beijing, that was in November 2018, where are we now? You wrote a book, a letter to the leaders of China, which was originally written as a manifesto in 2003. So if you were to write those letters again, what would you write?
Well, I think I'm still writing similar letters. It didn't change much. Those letters still, for example, 20 years ago, I already talked about the sponge city idea, talk about the ecological security pattern, and talk about we need to draw a line between nature and the city. So far, I think those letters now partially, part of those letters become policy, become reality, become policy. For example, as the ecological security pattern become a national agenda, and as a sponge city idea become a national campaign. But as a counterpart, the hydraulic engineer still doing same thing. It didn't change much. They're still channelizing the rivers. They're still building dams and dikes.
That's right.
So it looks like you know, it's a time still struggling between two kind of civilizations, two kind of culture. So that's why we need. I think it take. We still have to convince. Not only the leadership. Now the leadership actually accept these ideas. The leadership is quite on our side, on our ecological side, on our green side. But it's still need time to transform the engineer part, the industrial engineer part. You know, the thinking about how. They are powerful because they're still powerful. They're still, if you can read the Chinese, you will see that in these days, just in these couple days, there's a huge debate. It's a huge debate in the website. The ecological thinking about how should we give water more space, because a lot of news about flooding today in the many cities being under the flood. And on the other hand, the engineers or some forces still think that we need to build higher dams, higher dikes to control water. So it's a struggling, it's a time transformative, it's a transforming time, it's a time critical for the society to judge itself. Which way should we go? The ecological way, the sustainable way, or we will follow the track, the business as usual. So I think today I will make more powerful letter. Yeah.
Sure. Now, it's interesting. On the one hand, many of your recommendations and the things that you've written in those manifestos and the letters have reached the leadership. And we know that many of your ideas have been incorporated into national policies. But at the same time, what you're saying at another level, and I think you mentioned in one of your writings, the intellectual infrastructure needs to be changed. Meaning that not the top level, but at the mid-level where how things are carried out, that's still a challenge. Is that true? That
yeah, I totally
is that
agree.
What you're saying?
Yes, Yes.
Right. So, either intellectual infrastructure or bureaucratic boxes. And we have learned from you, Kongjian, and many people have learned from you all over the world. We admire you and we want to be like you. So don't think you're just dealing with China. You're now a model for much of the world. Right. So another thing in connection to what's going on right now. So writing in lockdown in April, you wrote some things. You were in the Jiangxi province, right? Is that is that where you are? Right. So sitting there, you wrote a few things, and I'm picking up 3 lines. 1, ways we have lived in cities is utter nonsense. You wrote that. Right. And number 2, many of human achievements are utter nonsense. And number 3, I picked up just 3. Number 3, the pandemic teaches us how hard it is to be separated from nature. Now, so I'm just pointing this out, and I'm thinking that this brings up the question of the relationship or the relationship among humans, the city, and what we call nature, whatever we call nature. So I'm thinking that how do we keep a distance from nature? By nature, I mean wilderness or wilderness, while also maintaining a sustainable connection. How do we do this?
Yeah. Actually, I wrote this text. Wrote called the COVID, the view through the landscape from my window. Right. I wrote exactly in the same room here.
Right, I've seen
so
the
it
photograph.
is in the countryside. Yeah, in the countryside. And I look at the village, which been here for almost 2,000 years. Yeah, and you can see the relationship between nature and people and the human being. It's in harmonious and it's in a resilient situation. And also it is, there's a boundary. There's a very strict boundary between human being and nature. For example, the forbidden forest should not be cut at the back. The water in front of the village still running as it did 2,000 years ago, still meandering through the floodplain. So first of all, I will say that we have to consider nature. There are some tattoos, some boundaries, some forbidden things we should not do. We should not eat, for example, we should not eat bats. That's some animals we should not, become food, or we should protect species, we should protect biodiversities. So this I call, the critical, some critical habitat, some critical infrastructure, the blue and green infrastructure. We should not go beyond. That's a boundary. That's the limit. That's the baseline. It's impossible for us to take over everything from nature. So this is this is tattoo. This is forbidden from so this is forbidden for some kind of behavior. Like in your culture or in Indian culture, the cows, the cattle should not be killed. Banyan tree should be protected. It's because we learned, the human being learns that it is critical for the survival of a human being. But at the same time, you can live with it. You can live with it. When you look at, we are so close to the water. If we understand that the water will come to a certain level, and the water can come to your threshold, come to the field. Now this is the zone that we can make friend with water. We can make friend with species. We can take a rest under the banyan tree or under the camphor tree. The village I'm staying here, there's huge camphor trees, which is 1,700 years old. It's huge camphor tree, and it's forbidden. It's a protected trees, like as a banyan tree in India, in Bangladesh, in Southeast Asia. This tree considered to be the god, but we are under the protection of the tree. But we will not touch this tree. Right? We will not touch this tree. So this comes to the idea of ecosystem services. If we can protect an integral ecosystem, we will get we will go to full set of services from the protected nature. That's why we should protect nature, but at the same time, we actually can get services from nature. So that's the relationship between father and son, and the mother and the son. It's this kind of relationship. Still think mother nature, yeah? Nature as mother or nature as father, which means we are dependent on nature. We should not go, we respect nature, but at the same time, we get a full services from mother nature. Yeah. Well, okay, that's, yeah.
I already have a few thoughts based on what you just said. I think one very important idea that you are suggesting is creating thresholds and boundaries. First of all, identifying things that needs to be preserved, not disturbed, and make it keep very special within the domain of what we call nature, and then create thresholds. Isn't this also kind of tricky? Tricky in the sense because who comes to decide that? Considering, like, this is because part of the economic pressure on the one hand and ecological preservation on the other hand. So who comes to claim this preservation and maintain this threshold?
Well, before industrial time, or before civilization, before we call it ecological industrial civilization, the people living in the nature decide which is more important, which is critical, which is have to be preserved. Now that is based on the experience, based on the trial, the failure, trial, and success. That's the wisdom accumulated based on generations of experience. But in our time, in McHugh say we should design with nature. That's basically based on the knowledge we have, the knowledge, the ecological knowledge, the understanding of the ecological system. We, as a planner, as a wise planner, should make the decision where should be the boundary between man and nature, where is the most critical part of nature should be protected. But certainly we are not decision makers, but we are just a bridge between the science and decision maker. Now that's the planning. So it is the people. The people who live, who depend on nature, who make survival through the adaptation to nature, that makes the decision where is most critical for this generation and for the next generation, for his children, for his fellow villagers. That's based on the agricultural experience, based on the living in the place. But today, certainly, the society changed. We have as a professional called a planner, the landscape planner. So as a planner, have to understand this, have to be based on a full understanding of the ecological process, the water, So the movement of species, the habitat, and certainly the whole ecological process. Now that's a limit. I mean, because science never stops. We never get a full knowledge of the nature. Now that's why we need some basic. We have to identify what is the critical natural process. For example, water. I will recognize water as the most critical natural process. So we have to understand that where is the most critical baseline,
right,
for the water process, right?
Right, great. I'm going to come to water in a little bit, but I really need to clarify one thing from you. We were discussing the boundaries to nature or boundaries of nature, but clarifying what you think about nature and what you think about village, because this is because of your love of rural ethos, rural life. This goes back to your argument for the Bigfoot culture, and also what I'm reading recently, the Wangshan life, where Wangshan life, am I saying it right? Where you say three things: reinstalling rural community to self-sufficient commune, and as an alternative to inner city. Now, I'm placing it as a question, but you can say it as you like. With your rural ethos, and also what you mentioned about nature, do you make the city as a kind of culprit, a villain? Are you being anti-urban?
Well, I'm anti-urban. I just think today I'm not anti-urban. I'm not anti-industrial civilization. But this time, actually, I'm thinking we are upgrading urbanization. We are upgrading the industrial civilization. So it can be post-industrialization or post-urban urbanization. It's just a new form. It's a new form of urbanization. So what is the form of future city? I'm thinking that based on our suffering from the industrial revolution, as well as blessings, of course. And we needed to come up to another stage, which is a new form of urbanization based on high technology, like 5G, high-speed train, high-speed internet. So it makes it possible for nature and technology come together again. Because the pandemic, the COVID-19, make today's urbanization suffer, right? Today, we live in such a dense city, which eventually turned into a jail for 3 months, for Wuhan, for Italians, for Chinese. And which means that we have to think another way of urbanism, or urban or city, or another type of city, which make it possible by this high-speed train and high-speed internet. So loving nature and loving civilization will eventually come together to make a revival the ancient settlement or ancient village. That's future. I'm thinking that's a future typology of urban form.
Right. I think, I mean, you're asking us to think in a very radical way. You mentioned new forms of urbanization. Yes, because the moment we think of city in its most positive light, it's about density. Because of the density, because of the way people come together, it allows certain things to happen. It as many writers have said, it unlocks human potentials by this close proximity. It generates creative responses. And typically they have been done through such public institutions like schools, libraries, public spaces. But I suppose we have to now have another element come in here. And you may call it landscape or nature, another big sort of public element needs to come in here. And you have done parks and all that within cities. But I suppose that should be a model. That should be a new, I would call landscape as a new technology by which cities can be transformed.
Yeah.
Right. And you're already doing that, right?
Well, that sounds very, very exciting. Or it's a nature-based solution. It's a globally we call nature-based solution. Yeah.
Right.
A landscape as a solution. Yeah.
Right.
A bit more than nature. Yeah, of course.
More than nature. Right.
More than nature-based. Yeah.
Now I have another something to ask you. I myself is trained as an architect. In the full sort of discipline of architectural, methodology, philosophy, history, and in all the conventions of being trained as an architect. But I have slowly learned to revise my understanding of architecture. Architecture as the built thing, and that is through landscape parameters. And I have come to appreciate architecture much more. And I have my way of describing architecture as a landscape event. Like the whole landscape is a stage and architecture is an event there. As a tree is an event, a building is an event. So, and while I had been in developing this idea, I read up something about Wharton Esherick, who was a modern wood sculptor who lived in Philadelphia. He was a friend of Louis Kahn. And as it is told, students asked him, "How should we think, master?" And he said, "Think like a farmer." And I found it striking. He was a modern wood sculptor, and he said, "Think like a farmer." He didn't say anything more. At the same time, Louis Kahn, who did this sort of big, monumental, big buildings, very sculptural and very profound and all that. But at the same time, he said something, and not much people know about this, that, I'm quoting Kahn, architects can learn from a farmer in not making the landscape pretty, but to preserve his crops by the logic of planting, by the logic of plants. But I suppose what he meant here was, because when you plant as a farmer, you can't just force things. You have to know the rhythm of the seasons, the rhythm of water, and there is just a process that you have to work with. I found that very profound. And I think, and you have constantly talked about this, the low culture, learning from the big food. Okay, if you want me to ask a question, in your scheme of things, how do you see architecture?
Well, for me,
I'm putting it in a reverse way, if you like.
Yeah, well, architecture for me, it is put things together. So architecture is design. I will extend it. Architecture is for if you narrow down. I mean, broadly speaking, architecture is put things together. The gathering. I will say the gathering. Is the gathering things. I will quote. Is that's certainly the idea from the philosophical phenomenological thinking. Architecture is gathering people, gathering nature, gathering phenomena. Build architecture is create. It's create the relationship between man, nature, and the spirit. So create architecture will feel that we at home, right? So to me, it's a landscape and architecture. That's why Olmsted say landscape architecture. It's the same, creating landscape is put things together in a harmonious way for people use, with people. people oriented, but put things together. But architecture is the same. You have to work with nature. I mean, a good architect, always a good landscape architect. You see, Louis Kahn and certainly Wright is, you know, Balagan also, right? So good architects is always work with nature to put things together: the wind, the water, the sun, the light, and for people to live, right? For people to get, and so, and spiritually also. So I approach the same thing. I agree with if you mention Louis Kahn as a farming, as I will say create a deep form. Agriculture is create something called a deep form. It's not a shallow form. It's not a lawn. It's not a sculptural garden. It's not a cosmetic garden. So gardening and the landscape, I always I always think it's different, totally different thinking. Landscape is something you create based on nature. Well, gardening, certainly you work with nature, but you create something different from the landscape, from the nature, which is against nature. But the landscape always work with nature. It's tried most adaptive to nature. It's just like architecture. A good architecture, a deep form architecture, will always work with nature. So nature architecture as it is, as should be, you know, as it should be. The wind, the water, the sun, just so come into to create something, just something you grown from the place, right? Like corn from the field. That's an object which designed by architects, a good architect, I would say.
Right. So, right. I was thinking that you have critiqued classical Chinese gardens. You have not designed a garden yet. Will you design a garden? So
no,
it seems
I designed
like
a garden. No, I think it's just to design a garden is not a difficult thing. So I can design it, but I reject anything, any client he wanted me to design a classical garden, because I think it's just a playful. It's just for something you create, you know, a piece of art or whatever. It's not a deep form. It's a shallow form. It's a form which will disappear easily. It's not a sustainable form. What I'm going to do is to create something sustainable form. As a form, it is fairly difficult, which I feel challenging and very exciting to do it, is that you create something beautiful at the same time ecological. Now, ecology and beauty are two different things. Ecological is not necessary to be beautiful, right? But the forest or wetland can be beautiful, but not necessarily, you know, not necessarily beautiful. A piece of nature, a piece of landscape, nature-based landscape, not necessarily beautiful. So how can you make a piece of nature beautiful that and designed with a human passion, with a human mark? That is difficult, actually. We are so used to do something beautiful or artful or identical to what you know, identical to human nature, a human body. I mean, human desire. But we are so difficult to design something which can sustain, but still you will feel it's a man-made. It's a human identity. So it is a new way of thinking. I would say how can we, that's what I call it deep form. So that's two questions, okay? To draw a line between nature and the culture is preservation. We protect the nature. The second strategy to protect nature and create deep form is the drip over. You will not recognize. You cannot recognize where's nature, where's culture. The same with architecture. You know, when I go to Italy, you know, look, there's a hilly town, the town on the hill. You will see they use rocks. They grow from the rocks. So it's a blur. The building is blurred into the rock. So it's a deep form. It's a deep form. But how can you create a contemporary deep form? You know, it is challenging for contemporary designers because the value of a human being is put our value, or add our value of nature, or put our artifacts to create our own identity. Now that's important. We don't want to blur into nature. We don't want to vanish into nature. We love nature, but we don't want it to be unrecognizable. So we want to recognizable, but at the same time, we don't want to destroy nature. Now that's a deep form. So deep form is one is a deep structure, which Anne Spirn, you know, from Penn, she's in her writing, she described as a deep structure. She said deep structure is a structure that based on natural process. Like you protect the water, there's a valley, you protect the wetland. When you design the city should reflect the natural system. So like in Manhattan, you know, design with nature. And Spirn described as deep structure. And as an American ecologist and a landscape ecologist is John Lai. John Lai used the word deep form. Now I want to develop this concept. Deep form, I describe at two levels. One is a deep structure, which is adjacency. Okay, it's a relationship, spatial relationship. So you can identify where's nature, where's culture. So this is one of a deep structure. A second relationship between man and nature is deep shape, deep form, like terraces, like the agriculture, the terraces, like in India and in China, Southeast Asia, we create terraces. The terrace, you don't say, you cannot recognize where's nature, where's culture, right? Because we drip culture over the nature, right? That's create terraces. So it is productive, it is beautiful. So two levels. One is the planning level to draw the line, which is adjacency, nature, city together. But they have boundaries. They're neighbor. You can identify the relationship. You can make a map. But the deep forms, the terraces, you cannot make a map. It's difficult to separate, right? The crops, the terrace above the slope. So that's my understanding. How can we create a deep form?
Right. Well, no, this gives us a lot of ideas to think about ourselves, your notion of contemporary deep form. And just to go over what you said, so I myself am clear, so I can think this through, that the deep form, as you see, number one, is built over time, gradually, little by little. That's my understanding. Two, collectively, by a group of people in a kind of consensus. They share certain ideas. If a whole group shares that idea, then they can build up that built form. the deep form. And number three, it's built on a natural process. Now, is this conflicted by contemporary conditions because of fierce, strong individualism supported by capitalist tendency? Are we at a problem here because of this, that we cannot get to the deep form? This is all like little forms, and they don't come together as a deep form. Is that possible?
Well, now that's we come to the social aspect, the social aspect. Certainly, I think the capitalism, it is a kind of ignorant about the existence of the limit of nature. Capitalism didn't build into the constellation of natural resources or the limit of natural resources. Actually, they make use of it. You know, they take advantage of what is most precise, precious part of nature. They will take over, right? They take it. Right? So capitalism without any powerful political or policy strain and restriction certainly will not come up with something designed with nature or deep form. But the tyranny didn't either. You know, the tyranny is so powerful. Human being imperialism certainly cannot create deep form because in this case we boot over everything, right? So I think it should come up with the idea it's ecology. Come up with this idea that ecology, when economy come together with ecology, which means the deep form is totally based on that's why I come to Wangzhan life. My idea of Wangzhan life is a life that should depend on the natural surfaces. Because we believe that nature can provide full surfaces, provide water, provide food, if we can make wise use of nature, we can make full use of, if we can make full, we'll get enough. Like Gandhi will say that we cannot be greedy, but we can get sufficient for living. In that case, we will be able to create really deep form, which man and nature come together. Now that's what I'm trying to do in Wangzhan life.
Okay.
Everything is fake now. Everything is shallow form, like tomatoes, even potatoes, like a sweet potato are totally fake. The colors are fake, made of chemicals. So so we can expand the idea, but you will say anything without rooted into the nature will become a fake, totally fake form. So the deep form is that human desire are based on the natural process.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
No, I will.
So everything,
more, yeah. Yes.
From architecture, from building, from city, from even a piece of potato, right? Piece of tomato. The tomato today is totally fake. In the supermarket, there's a fruit. It's so beautiful.
Yes,
but we
love
fake.
it. Yeah, we love it.
We love it.
Yeah. So,
but it's
that
fake,
becomes, yeah, but that becomes the norm. That becomes the practice. The fake is the fake is the new reality. And it seems like the deep form is a kind of resistance to the new reality, right? it has to
yeah,
overcome the new reality based on fake and sort of temporary things.
Yeah, that's right.
Artificial constructs. Right?
Artificial. So
right.
So it's I think it's a very interesting subject, but certainly architecture and landscape, it's the same.
Right.
Yeah. Right. We depend on energy. We depend on artificial energy to create artificial form and artificial reality.
Well,
now, yeah.
Go ahead, Kongjiyan, please. You were saying something. Sorry.
No, I'm saying that's why it's coming up to a new civilization, a new way of living, a new way. Now is that possible? But we're trying to do it. You know.
Sure.
Can ecological ecosystem services will be enough to provide the human desire? Will nature provide enough food? That's depend on us, right? Can you produce enough food without chemicals? No, that's a question. Can you create a beautiful landscape without destroying the nature? No, that's questionable. So that's a challenge for designers and for architecture and for landscape also.
But it seems to me in the meantime, you or Turenscape, you have worked on 300 cities, if I'm not wrong. You have done 2,000 landscape projects, if not more. You're not only great designs, but you're a great convincer. How do you do that? How do you do this? So please tell us about your process, because many of the young architects and landscape architects would like to know. What are the 5 steps to becoming Kongjian Yu?
Well, I think we are working in different systems. The political system are too different from America, from Bangladesh, from China, from India. Okay, so working in China, I think my experience is more suitable for working in China. Certainly, I have some experience in the States, of course, in other countries, but basically in China, I find that the first thing is certainly when I come back from the United States, I write the book. Right? I write book, try to educate the mayors first, the decision maker first. So you have to convince the mayor to lecture, go to media, like Ian McHugh did. He go to video, he go to television, talk to the video. So make your voice, make a voice, and a controversial voice, even really radical voice to give them the idea, to make them think totally differently. So that's one thing we did. The second thing is I write a letter to mayors, to write a letter to minister and the top leadership, the prime minister, the president. So that's a book to mayor, and eventually come up with a letter to leaders of China by Michael Sorkin. Really, Michael Sorkin, a great theorist. I'm sorry, he just passed away.
So sad about that,
So sad about that. Yeah, and he insisted that he wanted to use the title. His title, the book. He selects the title, and he selects the cover, which is so powerful. And the book is still banned in China. So it's the English version you cannot buy in China. But my Chinese version is well sold. It's become a textbook. You see, I have a textbook again. So the textbook is become I'm here. Yeah. So the textbook must be read by every Chinese Communist Party leaders. It's from top-down system. So I write several letters. I think it's important. So first one, I told the mayor and the prime minister to say that we need to draw the boundary between nature and culture, between nature and the city. Now that's being accepted. The second proposal I wrote to the mayor is that we need to protect vernacular cultural landscape, the cultural heritage. We need to protect the Grand Canal. And those also being accepted by the Chinese government. And the Grand Canal now become a World Heritage Site. I also write letter to President Xi and Prime Minister and told them that we have to ban the channelization of the rivers, and we have to stop building dams and dikes. And this this proposal have not been accepted yet. But still, the ecological, hydrological engineering solution still being considered to be a green solution for China. Still, being debated and being accepted to certain levels, because the Ministry of Chinese hydrological water resources is still there. And but China now restructuring the national administration. In the past 3 years, the Chinese government have restructured and established 2 new ministries. One is the Minister of Natural Resources. The second is the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. Now that's really something fundamental change to the national administration. And the ecological security pattern being put into Congress, being, the document in the Congress become national agenda. So another thing, the fourth suggestion I wrote to the mayors and the prime minister is sponge city. Now that's become a national agenda, become a national campaign to solve the urban inundation and the urban flood using sponge, green sponge. So these, I think, make it successful. I feel successful is because I was somehow being adapted by this Chinese leadership. Right. Even though I'm being attacked by the technocratic intellectuals, I still consider to be very controversial at this level, at the middle level.
But you like it because because it seems that besides the landscape architectural designs and the ecological planning, you created a lot of noise.
Yes.
Yeah, I would call it either.
I hope you can read the Chinese.
Right. No, but because it seems like, because I was asking you, how do you do this? What's your process? Part of much of your activity has been activism or being a public intellectual to go into the public forum and speak these things.
Yes.
So, right.
So this I will say this educational approach. So educating to create a noise, to create a media coverage, to create to create awareness from the leadership. Second, I will say you need to really create something example, solid example, to show them examples. For whatever effort, you have to make a good example. Now that's important. So my first project is the Zhongshan Shipyard Park. I transform a shipyard into a park. Meantime, I use ecological approach to dechannelize the bank of the lakes and the river, and to integrate it with native plant and keeps industrial heritage. Keeps the railroad. Remember that's 20 years ago, much earlier than the High Line in New York. We already create this industrial park, and it's become so successful, and it become an example to be learned by mayors, by academia, and by decision makers, and also several examples. So you create radical examples. So I remove all the concrete. Remember, I turn the river into nature again. And the river just channelized a year ago, and now just a year later, we demolish. Now that's really make a good example. Okay, so a visible example. Now again, that's not enough. The most important thing, maybe one of the most important thing, is that make it beautiful. Now make it lovely. So beauty here is powerful tool to convincing people, convincing decision maker. That's make architects and landscape acts different from just ecological restoration or environmentalist, because we can make things beautiful. You know, that's totally different. And certainly, you show examples. You keep talking examples. Show them example. Example is gold. You show them good examples, convincing. But in addition to that, I educate. I create a school. Okay, I create a school in the best university in China, in Beijing University. Now that's also important. That's make your voice powerful. So you have a platform, you have students, you have professorship, and you're being recognized globally also. That's important also, right?
Right.
That's make your voice to be listened, to be aware. So I think that those are things that you convincing. And first, and finally, you have to have a really persistent character, a persistent personality. You know, you never give up. That's important.
Yeah.
At a difficult time, you know, at the beginning, it's difficult. You can imagine, you know, it's really difficult at the beginning. As the first 5 years, I get so much resistance from everywhere. So but as soon as you create something beautiful, people love it, and you will get power. Yeah. So after all, you have to be powerful to some way, you know, intellectually, design as a professionalist. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So knowledge is power.
Right. But also what you mentioned, one thing to emphasize is also create these public spaces for people, you know, so you transform these spaces, which may be industrial spaces, infrastructural situations, but then you make this not only a new ecological condition, better ecological condition, but also as a beautiful landscape situation, but also public spaces. And so people,
yeah.
Ultimately, they are the one who will say that this is what we want.
Yes,
right.
Yes. For the people, yeah, of course. You don't want to work for the rich private residency, for example. But certainly you want to make money by building rich residency. But make a public space more visible, more convincing, can be used by people. So give you power. I would say give you power. Yeah.
It seems to me, by looking at all your projects, and I have not visited all your projects, but from what I see, water is a very predominant element as an organizing or structuring element. And you mentioned earlier that you see water as a critical natural process. I was thinking that does working with water at that scale, not like water as a pond, but water as a part of a natural process, does that require a new design intelligence? By that I mean that, you know, again, the way architects are trained and landscape architecture trained in a different way, but nowadays there is a little bit of intermingling. By new design intelligence, I mean that I've used this terms, and I shared that in an article that I wrote for you in 2015. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
Terms like, which are water-related terms, and maybe that should be part of the design intelligence. Buoyancy, immersion, drift, float, ebb, tide, you know, rhythm, I think those are the language or even the experience of water. And shouldn't architect in water countries, shouldn't that be the foundation of the design intelligence? Should there be a new design intelligence?
I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. I think particularly in this monsoon climate, right? So Indonesia, Malaysia, and Bangladesh, India, China, Southeast Asia. Now the whole half of the hemisphere looks like we are totally not in the architectural history.
Mm.
I mean, we're talking about you know, when you look at these are all developing countries, almost all of them are developing countries. The buildings, the designs, and we still consider water. We didn't embrace water as part of building process. We did, you know, our ancestor did. The ancient town, ancient farmers, peasants, they have to live with water. Floating building, terraces. So those are, you have to work with water, right? Certainly some Western architect like the falling water is as a building. It looks like it work with water, but you can imagine, you know, that's take water as pressure. Yeah, it's certainly designed with water, but we have to design water as a survival issue, as adaptation to really. We not just make pressure with water. Now we have to live with water really to be able to adapt to water, to flood, for example. So those, I think, certainly become critical for today, even for the other part of the sphere, like the Venice, you know, being flooded, right? Like the western part of the world also being flooded because of climate change. So I think certainly water is the key for landscape, but also for buildings. Because monsoon climate, I think you have to be able to deal with the monsoon climate. Half of the year is dry, and the 3 months of the time is really wet. Now, how can you regulate such kind of monsoon climate? The industrial solution did not work. The way we built the city is totally based on the European experience. Dhaka, India, you know, we tried to build the city following the industrial revolution model, industrial technology. We build pipes with the pumps, but we don't have to. You know, we don't have to do that. When you look at Dhaka, the suburb of Dhaka, people build dikes and live on dikes. Right? You don't need a drainage system actually. How can we build a city without drainage system? Indonesia, I mean, Jakarta, it been flooded, right? They have to move the capital.
Yes.
It's just because we build a city.
It's sinking. Right?
It's sinking.
Jakarta, right?
Jakarta is sinking and flooded. 30%, 50% of the city is flooded. So I think it's challenging for architects, urbanists, and landscape architects to find a new way of building cities for the developing countries, or virtually for the monsoon climate. We need a new model of design, urbanism. We cannot just depend on the Dutch model or the It's a London, Paris model. They build pipes, build tanks underneath to deal with a flood. That's not work. That will not work for Bangladesh, for Dhaka, for Guangzhou, for Shenzhen. Will never work. So I think that's why. Yeah.
No, is that why the two things I'm noting? You described landscape architecture as the art of survival. And then also you mentioned that survival is more critical for Southeast Asian nations.
Yes.
By Southeast Asian nations, I mean including Bangladesh, which is like the border between South Asia and Southeast Asia. There are three things happening here: monsoon climate, big rivers, and the delta. So water is not only the critical natural process; it is the natural process. So, and I don't know if you want to, you already have mentioned a few things. Do you think you want to explain for us a little bit why you have said so strongly that survival is critical for Southeast Asian nations through landscape architecture?
Yes. Well, as I just mentioned, because right now I'm doing a study with my student to see how many cities have been flooded in the world. And it turns out to be most of the monsoon climate cities are under the suffering of flood. So all the pipe system we laid out based on our, business as usual model, just roads, pipelines, pumps, eventually will not work. It doesn't work. So landscape actually, which means nature-based. Landscape means nature-based. We have to do with nature, design with nature to solve the problem. How to select the site for the city, how to draw the line between city and the nature, and how to design the nature in the city. So these are the critical survival issues. You imagine, 79 people died on the street in Beijing in 2012. Every summer during the monsoon climate, hundreds of people died in China. That's a survival issue. It's about how to use nature wisely, how to depend nature wisely, how to avoid the force of nature, but at the same time, how to create a harmonious relationship between the cities, the buildings, the farm with nature. Okay? So that's the living with nature, the design with nature. So but this is art of survival. It is a survival issue. It's not something we create a garden, Louis XIV's Versailles. It's not to create something just beautiful. So we are creating a place for people to have a secure livelihood. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I think I've come to the last topic question. You have already mentioned Bangladesh. You have visited the country a few times, and I don't know, there's perhaps an opportunity of you're doing something in Bangladesh. And I feel all the things you have done in China is so acutely, in a very condensed way, relevant for Bangladesh, in a very powerfully condensed way. And therefore, I'm very keen in what you might, how you might work in Bangladesh when you work. And I think you mentioned that the sponge city idea is most relevant for, as you just mentioned, for the flooded landscapes of Southeast Asia, and Bangladesh does fall into that. I just wanted to mention here that while Bangladesh is part of this larger landscape matrix of Southeast Asia, there's also something very specific about this landscape, which is the incredible dynamics of the river for a small country, the fluctuation between land and water. One season it's land, another season it's water. And so there's all this sort of in-between conditions to work with. The whole conflict between what I call dry ideology and wet practice, which is going back to dry ideology, meaning the infrastructure of the engineers and all that. And also the sort of the making and dissolving of the sand islands we call chores in the river, and the flood will come. So, I'm just saying very quickly, we are also trying to organize our ideas and thoughts about the landscape, larger landscape here. Can you share what steps would you think for your possible Bangladesh project, if you would like to share?
I need to plug in the power.
Okay.
You mean if I work in Bangladesh, how should I work? How should I do?
Yes. What steps would you think? You have already. Yes. Is there any specific way you would like to approach?
Well, I think Bangladesh and Chinese Pearl River Delta shares a similar climate. Very similar climate. Flood, but you have much more water than Pearl River Delta area. But it's the same problem, the similar problem. We are suffering flood. So Yangtze River is suffering flood. These days, city being flooded, and at the same time we have to live on, water with water. Yeah, we have dry season and flood season. And also Bangladesh is in the process of developing, right? So we have chance to develop if we can plan wisely. I saw you have did a fabulous national thinking, national imagination about how Bangladesh can be built. I totally agree. Right now, it's time to think of Bangladesh as a king. So that's why I call it think like a king. Think as your own territory, as homeland, as how you will create such a kingdom. This nation should be think as a whole picture. Think of whole picture to live with the nature as a water as a level. So even it's been flooded, you still have islands, the sand dune, as you mentioned, the beach, the sun. It's so beautiful landscape. If you can use wisely at this time, it's the only chance. For 2,000 years, maybe for 5,000 years, it's the only time for this nation to plan wisely. We should not miss this opportunity for Bangladesh. I think China have missed a lot of opportunities in the past 40 years because we didn't make a wise plan for the nation, a national development, a national spatial planning. And for Bangladesh, you have 15 million people, right? It's not, you have about 15 million people, right?
No, that's only in Dhaka. You have like
in Dhaka. How big?
160, right? 160 million people for the.
Oh yeah, 160 million people. So you have a huge population, but still needed to be urbanized, right? A huge number will go to the city eventually. So it is the right time for this nation, for the president, for your president to think about how we can make a nation for next 5,000 years. Now that's the imagination. I think your leadership should think about that. If we can make a right decision right now, you can create a beautiful nation, and economically, ecologically, socially, harmoniously, nation. I think that's so important, because right now, based on my experience in China, we are too late. In some case, we are too late because 70% of the nation, of the built-up nation, as built-up cities, is in the flood zone, in the flood risk, with a heavy risk of flood, in the Yangtze River, in the Pearl Delta River, to Guangzhou, Shanghai, Wuhan, for example, suffering flood every year. You can imagine if we can plan the city earlier, wisely, we can save so much billions of dollars to protect the city from being flooded. So that's my first thinking. Think like a king. Think like a king. This man, if you are president, hears a voice, I think that's make she the legendary figure in the future, will be the goddess, will be the god for the future, for the whole nation. The second I will do is to act like a peasant. So think like a king, act like a peasant, which means we have to learn from the peasants how they adapt to this really harsh monsoon climate. They have wisdom in order to make survival. How can we pick up this wisdom to create a new form of deep form, a new deep form? Since this kind of deep form is living with nature, make friends with nature, a new form of settlement for the city, So it's a smart city. It should be a smart city. Should it be live with nature? I don't think it's difficult. I think it's really can be a unique form. Your city will be totally different from any American city, for any European city. You will have a city, Bangladesh city. You know, you have pond and dike system. I find it's really beautiful. It's a sponge-like, you know. The people live on the dike, and they can, you know, create a beautiful network of settlements. You know, it's beautiful, a new way of living. That for the city. We should not look like the Dhaka is certainly not a good model. Dhaka, the nature disappear in Dhaka. You can easily create a natural system in the city, within the city. I would say live with water, a floating city, some kind of floating city, resilient city. That's what I can imagine. So
thank you. Right.
Yeah, think like a king, like you have described it. You really, I like your article. It's yeah. Imagine a beautiful nation,
right?
And it's not too late. What's the percentage of urbanization in your country, in Bangladesh? 50%?
I wouldn't say 50%. It's less than 50%. I don't know. I think it's about 40%. It's rapidly increasing.
Yeah.
Right.
So it is the only time. In 20 years, it'll be too late. It's the only time. It's the only window for you to restructure the national landscape. It's restructure the building of a national landscape. Make use of momentum of urbanization. Without this momentum, you will not be able to build the city.
True.
Yeah, that's the only momentum. You can make it. You can make use of it.
I mean, the problem with Dhaka, the problem with Dhaka is that before you are able to think about what new urban form will it take, according to the lines you have suggested, the city is being built. So it's you're right. So at Bengal Institute, that's the challenge or the responsibility that we have taken now. we have the big picture, we have the long view, we have the strategies in hand, but we are working in small ways, in more reasonable ways. But we are ready to support the government for the big wise plan if that invitation or opportunity comes, and we hope that something can be done together.
If you can build some model, if you can build a city model, and the model will be replicable, replicable across the nation, that would be really, really beautiful.
We're trying.
We need to build a model city. Huh?
Yeah, a model city, right?
Yeah.
First of all, we need to gather our ideas, the right ideas, the right motivation, and the right support where we can do this. Or even the first foundation for the model city, that should be established. I think.
Yeah.
I feel that very soon that opportunity may come. So when that opportunity comes, we have to be ready. That's how we think. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think we in Bangladesh, because when I look at, sometimes the floodplain have like 5 meter, 3 to 5 meter difference from flood and dry season, right?
Yes. Yes.
Sometimes
right.
10 meters. Yeah.
Right.
So you
Kongjiyan, even 2 inches matter. Like the water comes in 2 inches. It's not land, it's not water. It's just like
that's
2
right.
inches of water, right?
Yeah. So I think the city can be very beautiful if we integrate nature into the city.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's very sad. I visited Dhaka. The rivers, the lakes are all polluted. All cut off. All cut off.
Yes,
Yeah.
Right. I'm just told by my colleague that 36.3% urbanized in Bangladesh. So
okay.
Close to 40.
So you just like 20 years ago in China. So you will be in next 20 years, you will be 60%. It's likely 1% every year is likely. So I think it's immediate. It's so urgent. Right?
No, we know that. No, that's the reason. That's the reason. The mission for Bengal Institute. Because the only challenge, the big challenge, the only challenge is the city. Whatever you want to call it, the city. Especially in conditions like that. That's the only challenge. You can do beautiful buildings. You can do beautiful structures. As I say that in Dhaka, that architects are making beautiful buildings. The city is going to hell. So what is going on?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm not. Well, I can get involved in doing beautiful buildings, but I have taken on the mission of working at that scale.